Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hello. Before I start, just some background on myself. I know quite a few of you in here know me already, but my name's Simon Soper. I've been skydiving for 15 years, and I am a big fan of CF. So when I started doing my advanced instructor rating, you have to do a specialised subject. I wanted to do it on CF, and I was talking about CF specialisations, and I started to think about knives. And I got into the weeds on knives and realised that there's a whole presentation I can do on knives, and perhaps things that people haven't thought about before. So, let's get into it. Knives. Just before we start, I want all of you to close your eyes now. Imagine you're in your harness. Put your hand on your knife. Good. A lot of people went there very quickly. Didn't even have to think about it. That's okay. Open your eyes again. I've done that before, and people are then fumbling around going, actually, where is my knife? I'm not really thinking about where it might be. But I know I've got a lot of crew jumpers in the room who've used them, so they're all over it. Why do we carry knives for skydiving? Any suggestions, anyone?
Because the ops manual says we have to. Yes, that's the main. Because we might need.
Very good answer. Yes, because we have to. Yeah, so paragraph 3 of section 6, equipment in the operations manual says all British skydivers, A licence and above, are required to carry a serviceable knife about their person or on their equipment. The knife should be readily accessible. Basically, because we should. And it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. Has anyone here used their knife in hot blood? Okay, yeah. We've got a few. Come on in. That's all right. So, what scenario do you use it?
I've got a couple of bridles and things to retract mouths and three canopies.
So in CF, yeah. And yourself?
Four-way crew run.
Four-way CF, okay. Can anyone think of a scenario that's not deliberately wrapping yourself in someone else's parachute where you might use a knife? Go and see.
I personally watched a double mount where the jumper couldn't get their knife out because they were actually pinned by their reserve they were in a reserve entanglement after a main malfunction.
Okay, so if you didn't hear that, Steve was saying the jumper was in. He's got the microphone.
I've got a microphone. That's loud.
Okay.
So I watched an incident happen. I was in the air flying my canopy, and on the same load there was a jumper who had a malfunction on their main. It was a high-performance main canopy. They cut away from a spinning mal. During the reserve deployment, they had a reserve entanglement, and they had their leg pinned against their body, and their knife was on their hip, and they couldn't get the knife out because of the position of the knife, which then resulted in a spiralling reserve till they hit the ground. They luckily survived without any injuries, don't know how, on a very, very small reserve as well. However, in that instance, it was like, well, okay, you know where your knife is, but in certain situations, are you going to be able to get to it?
Okay, yeah, so I know that one as well. Anyone else think of another one?
Restraints. Somebody going out the door not taking a restraint. I probably went caught on a restraint.
Okay, so again, for those without the microphone, he's suggested if you're forgetting to take your restraint off, you leave the aircraft with the restraint still attached, you might need to cut it. Yep, that's a good one. Some drop zones will have quick releases on their restraints, so not necessary, but if you've got a carabiner, for sure, you have to lift with one arm and undo with the other. Probably not going to happen. Cutting it, yep.
Opening your beer?
For opening your beer,
I don't think you need a microphone.
it's a maverick suggestion. Anyone else? Anyone know of an incident that might have happened where the knife was used?
The obvious one that you shouldn't do is using your knife to trim bits of line for new loops and things like that, so the knife is blunt when you come to use it. But you see so many people using their little hook knife for just about everything they need to cut, when in fact that's one thing they shouldn't use it for.
Trimming packing tags, yeah. Got your repack due tag from the new drop zone. You want to trim the tail off. Yeah, lots of people use it for that, but we'll look later at serviceability and maintenance of knives. But yeah, not the best idea. So there were a couple of incidences that led to this rule being made. One of them was a line over on a reserve, and the chap happened to be wearing a knife and was able to release the line over by using his knife. The second one was a young lady who had landed, parachute reinflated, and the line went round their neck. The first chap on the scene happened to be a CF jumper with a knife and was able to cut that and release it. Now that scenario actually happened again recently, within a couple of years. I met the instructor that was clearing the line from the student's neck. So yeah, for someone else is also a good answer. Yeah, we'll have a look about more of that. We'll have a look in more depth at that later on in the presentation. So yeah, that's why we might need knives. Here is an example of a knife actually being used in air for CF. The quality on this is quite low. It happened a few years ago, so it was filmed on a potato. But here we go. I felt the need to put the build up into it so people don't get scared of CF. This is perfectly fine and normal, okay?
That jumper on the left is really talented.
Yeah, so that jumper that did the crash there might be in the room. So they're in the wrap. It's nice and controlled. The chap that is wrapped, his parachute's still fully inflated. It's flying absolutely fine. They're trying to communicate a cutaway. Struggling to communicate, to be honest. They do eventually release the main parachute, as you'll see soon. There we go. So the lower jumper's released, falls away, opens his reserve, no problem at all. The higher jumper here is still wrapped up in the parachute. He's carefully clearing it off his body, clearing it away from his handles, taking his time, being controlled about it, and getting himself clear of the parachute. So fun fact about this jump is in CF we tend to swap kit around quite a lot, and the parachute this chap's wrapped in is actually his own. Yeah. So he's released most of it, but as you can see, one line is left around his risers, and as the parachute's creating drag behind him now, it's going up his risers and is threatening to choke out the parachute that he's on that is still good. So takes his time, pulls out his knife, cuts the line. Lovely, just like that. Now the knife that did that job was one of these. One of those little tiny orange plasticky ones that we're all told are awful, but worked. So, knife design. Now when thinking about knives generally, I went down a bit of a wormhole during lockdown, started making my own knives. This one here on the left is one that I made. I know, right? Looks crap. Works very well. The other one I have here is a bushcraft knife. So these are both general purpose knives. This one I keep in my pocket for opening Amazon parcels. This one I keep in my car. It's actually inside a first aid kit. It's an emergency knife. If I get stranded somewhere or there's an incident, needs to cut clothes off, that'll do a very good job. The knife far right, not my clothes. The knife on the far right is a rope rescue knife that I keep on my climbing harness. Very easy, very lightweight to carry, has a specific purpose. So these are very general purpose knives. Nice straight edges, can do a lot of different cutting applications. The one on the right there, the rope rescue knife, you can see has serrations. The serrations, as you'll see, if you look at rescue knife design, are fairly common. If you're looking at general purpose use knives, say your standard kitchen knife, they tend to be straight edged because they have a wide range of uses. But when we look at rescue knives, serrations are extremely common. The thing about this is generally it's used for releasing lines. So if you're wrapped in a rope or lines like we use, for whatever reason, serrations do a really good job of cutting through those fibers by giving extra surface for the fibers to be running over. And the geometry of them means that whilst the blade is slicing across, it's also digging in. And that's a really useful thing to be doing when you're cutting. As you might know from the kitchen, if you push straight down with your knife, it's not as effective as if you're drawing forward with your knife at the same time, or backwards. The serrations are able to achieve that push and draw at the same time in one motion. So that was something I figured we'd have a look at in terms of efficacy when it came to testing. Hook knives. again, we see these used quite a lot in rescue applications because you're able to get between a person and whatever is trapping them. As you can see, I've got a mock-up there of being wrapped in lines and canopy, and I'm able to get the knife between the material I want to cut and myself without cutting myself, which is the point, right? We want to reduce the amount of harm that's going to happen to us. Open blades in high-stress situations may actually harm you a lot more than just staying trapped. Okay? So, hook knives, really good for rescues. Lots of other people use hook knives. It's not just skydivers. As I've already said, for rescue, so down the bottom there you can see an American policeman's webbing belt with his rescue knife on it. You can tell it's an American because he's got a gun, several guns. And at the top there, kite surfers. If any of you have ever watched competition kite surfers launching, you'll end up with 20, 30 chaps all within 10 meters of each other. It gets very chaotic, and they do get tangled up fairly regularly. So we see a lot of hook knife use in kite surfing. In fishing, for trigger lines, you catch a fish that's a bit too big, or that fish then gets caught by a shark, you might want to release the line. So again, a hook knife is something they would use. For climbing and caving, as I've already said, as a rescue knife. And these chaps tend to use, I say chaps and chapesses, my apologies. These people tend to use knives a lot more commonly than we do. In skydiving, the use of a knife is fairly rare. I'm sure we have hundreds of thousands of jumps worth of experience in this room, and we've got a few examples of knives being used. Whereas in these applications, it's much more common. So the knives are much more mass-produced. They tend to be cheaper, and because they're being used more, they tend to be more effective. And we'll come to that in a minute. So, testing the knives. First test group is ones with twin blades. So the main features here, they've got two blades inside the mouth. May I borrow the stick, please? Thank you. Yeah, so inside the mouth of the hook, you can see there's two blades in here, and that one's more clear. These two are kite surfing knives, very small, very discreet, twin-bladed knives. You can carry several of them on your harness, no worries at all. In fact, on my own personal equipment, I've got two just on this side. One there. Oh, that was a bit stiff. And one there. Two little kite surfing knives. And they're also very cheap. Each of those costs less than a tenner compared to your skydiving hook knives, which have run to what, 20, 25 quid now? Something like that, at least. The larger ones, we'll see these typically in the back of tandem harnesses. They've got a bit more room for them, or instructors will carry them strapped to their legs. These are probably not that much more expensive. But the thing to note with the bigger knives is that if you twist them, the blades do separate. And if you would like to inspect my knives at the end of the talk, you can see the ones I did the test cuts on still have fabric jammed in between the two blades. Test group 2, your typical skydiving knives, the ones that everyone seems to have. Did I miss a group? I missed the group. Test group 2, there we go. Thank you, Pez. Fishing trigger line knives. Now, I thought these might be quite good for skydiving because they come typically with their own sheaths. They can be mounted. You can draw and use them in one hand without having to fiddle around with them. They've got serrations to help cut through multiple fibers. And they're hook-ended, which is a bonus as we've seen already. Test group 3 are typical skydiving knives. Yeah, standard. So we have a Z knife, the little plastic orange ones that we know can be brittle in cold weather, your standard polycarbonate knife, an aluminium framed version, and then what they call the monster knife from Safety Knives, which is the producer of most of these. Test group 4, single piece blades. I chose these two because they're the two I had access to. There are others in this sort of category. But what we're looking at here is essentially one piece of metal that's been ground to have a hook inside the top of the frame there. The second one, the Gill Marine Harness Rescue Knife, has serrations on it as well. So it will cut material in the way into the mouth. The advantage of these are that they are maintainable. You can sharpen them up quite easily. Disadvantage, they're high carbon steel, so they will rust. You do need to look after them. And then we have our crew knives, because crew guys use knives, so they've got the best knives, right? The first one in their group is the Aircrew Rescue Knife. These were issued by the RAF for many, many years, and they're actually quite expensive now. This is a collector's item, if anyone would like to make an offer to Marcus afterwards. Yes, mate. Shows how much we use them. And this one was the knife that I got for doing CF because I couldn't afford the collector's edition. We're looking at a blunt tip. I was thinking so I can get between my skin. Serrations for cutting through multiple lines and fibres. Much, much cheaper than the Aircrew knife. So that's why I went for this option.
Stop spoiling my sales pitch.
Not a collectible though. It's, there's no history or vintage with that. So using a knife. All blades work much better with a slicing or sawing action. And as we've seen with the serrations, that sawing action is already built into the blade. And we should aim to cut at 45 degrees to the weave. There are technical reasons for this, but it's easier if I just demonstrate why. So it's a standard piece of type 7 webbing, and type 8 webbing. And as I'm cutting perpendicular to it, you can see it was quite hard work. At 45 degrees, like butter, straight through. So you play that again. So that's the Aerojack, a twin-bladed knife. There we go. I chose the Type 8 material because it's fairly common harness material. And whilst you don't want to be cutting your harness in air, very bad idea, they are also on tandem risers. So I was thinking, what worst case scenario? If you need to cut part of your tandem away because you've got all the weight of the extra person and the more size being swung around, extra tension, and that material to try and get through. So I went for the Type 8 for my test subject rather than Type 17, which is a typical riser material. Why won't we want to cut our risers? I do know of an incident where someone tried to cut away and the RSL that was on their riser had flipped through just at the wrong time and the middle ring got caught on the RSL shackle. So it wouldn't release on one side. They then cut their riser and were able to release the main successfully and deploy the reserve. But yeah. So, riser material, that's why I chose that. The 10 kilo weight to keep the tension on it nice and even throughout the tests. There are videos on YouTube, if you want to go and look for them, where you can see someone standing in a piece of tubular webbing, which is rated to 4,000 pounds. Their whole body weight's on it, and they're able to cut through it very easily with a blunt knife. And you can do it yourself. If you suspend yourself by anything at all, you can take a relatively blunt knife and cut through it because of the tension on the line. By keeping it to 10 kilos, that reduces the amount of tension, i.e. the drag of your main parachute that's trailing out behind you. It might not be under that much force. So I chose to just use a lighter weight to do the tests. To simulate being wrapped in a parachute, I took 2 layers of ZP from an old parachute I decommissioned and 3 lines, bundled them up. And obviously I couldn't be completely uniform with these, so in the tests it's not perfectly uniform, but it's as good as I can manage. To simulate the first scenario we saw, where the chap was wrapped in a parachute and he had to release himself, if the lower jumper couldn't cut away and he needed to cut his way out of it, that's what this test was for. Would your knife be able to manage that? There we go. does what it says on the tin. Just a bit about the videos you're about to see. One important thing to note on here, I didn't perform any maintenance between the test cuts. Reason for this I'll discuss later, but I just kept the knife as it was and did the cuts multiple times. So first up, test group 1, and we're twin blade knives, cutting through the riser material. No problem at all. You can see that's got a bit of fluff in it already from an earlier test. Got a bit stuck, but then cut through. Picks up quite a lot of material afterwards. It's test group 2, the fishing trigger knives, trigger line knives. Completely ineffective. The slightly larger one, go for a clean piece of material, did get through it, but it took a lot of effort to get through. Standard polycarbonate knife. That was a fight. This one with an aluminium frame. Again, really struggling to get through it.
Are those single or twin blades?
Single blades. The monster knife, again, another single blade. So test group 3, these ones. Did a better job, but still hard work. Now, I had a couple of Z knives. As you can see, this one failed to cut.
Is everyone feeling uncomfortable right now?
Pulled out a second one, and this one did cut through. So that one, the first one I did had a completely blunt blade. I didn't notice till afterwards. The second one more effective. The single pieces, no problem cutting through at all. The aircrew knife eventually got there because the material simply moved out of the way. I pressed against it, it moved off the blade. The knife that I got, in a very misinformed manner, as you can see, the serrations are actually hanging up, making the cut more difficult. Test 2 with the canopy wrap simulation. This is the first group, the twin blades. They have a small mouth, so getting the material into the mouth of the twin blade knives, I found to be a bit of a struggle. Oh, thank you. As you can see, it's still got the debris of the first test. Quite a large nose on this one. So again, I struggled to get into the material and picked up a lot of fabric. So making subsequent cuts is obviously going to become more and more difficult. The aero jack, slightly lower profile nose, but twin blades again. Had to go completely under my arm, out away from the material to be able to get the material into it. As you can see, I haven't got anything on at the moment because this is the fishing trigger line knives, and I injured myself in the process of this, which is why I ended up with my arm wrapped. But again, completely ineffective. Shockingly poor. Test group 3, our standard skydiving knife. So this is your single blade polycarbonate knife that you get from the shop for however much. Did the job, but you see how the material's gathered into it again. The aluminium one did a slightly better job, but again, you can see how it's gathered material. The monster knife I was much more careful with. It's a very large mouth. That's a big blade to put against your skin. And the Z knife, this one gave me a bit of a poke too. It's quite a sharp nose, but made it effective for getting under the material. However, cutting with it, yeah, that was me just checking if I was bleeding. ineffective cutter. Single piece, test group 4. Nice small nose, under the material, clean cut. Again, small nose, under the material. Took a bit more cutting, that one, but again, clean cut. The aircrew knife. Yeah, no. Absolutely not. I wasn't even going to bother trying to get that under my skin. But again, I was already bleeding. Okay. So I went completely under my arm, away from my flesh. Again, with the, no, not going to bother. I was pretty depressed at this point, but it wasn't that bad. But again, you can see the serrations actually hanging up on the material and failed to make the cut. So the results. Group 1, very, very effective cutters. It can be difficult to get them between yourself and the material because of the extra distance in the nose. Now they need a wider nose because, as you can see, the screw in there holding the second blade in. The other thing I found was, with this knife, the cheaper version of the larger twin blade knives, this area of it was quite flexible. I'm able to easily flex that around and open those blades up, which meant material could get caught in the gap. With the more expensive Aerojack, it's not as flexible, so didn't hang up quite so much material, which was good for making subsequent cuts with a knife that hadn't been cleaned. Very easy to maintain, and they all have replaceable blades. So if you've used it, you don't have to get a new knife, you can just get new blades, which makes them quite cheap as well. And as I said, very small, easy to carry, very cheap. Very cheap. Test group 2, awful. Awful knives. Absolutely terrible. Sharp points that dig in, weren't able to cut because of the small serrations. Because the teeth on them were very, very small, what they did is actually just pick up the fibers of the line and hold on to them. They weren't cutting through the line. There wasn't none of that sawing action that we wanted. So they just held on to the line. I've actually written on the case of this one, do not jump, unairworthy. Okay, just to remind anyone that might come across, oh, I need to borrow a knife, and they grab this. It's like, no, absolutely awful. Although I can see the temptation in a big bag of knives. The red one's quite pretty. Test group 3, the ones we most commonly see in skydiving. They cut. They did. They were okay for a line, a couple of lines. However, they have a very oblique angle between the blade and the body. And you can see in here, there's a bit of material caught up. So what happens is as the fabric goes into the knife, it runs along the blade, gets jammed against the frame at the back, and then that's it, it sits there. You've then only got a very tiny area for the cutting surface. The knives I've used for test cuts here, you can come and have a look after. There's damage on all of them right up against the frame where that material's gone in, it's sat on the edge, and then it's rolled the edge of the knife. So at this point, you don't have a razor's edge anymore. You've got quite a blunt edge because the sharp bit is just rolled over. So good for 1 or 2 lines. But if you're an instructor, say, in an aircraft, dispatching multiple static line students, hypothetically, you have an air crash, you're going to have to cut multiple restraints and multiple static lines to get your students out, potentially. One of those little knives isn't going to be good enough for that. It's not going to make that many cuts. The larger knife, obviously, the monster knife, bigger cutting area, less oblique angle, more effective. Same with the Z knife. As we've already established, these tend to shatter in the cold. They've got a shelf life of about 10 years before the material gets brittle. And this one, that very large open blade, was hard to use against my body because it just wanted to bite me. Okay, so yeah. Do they do the job of what most people are thinking of using them for? A single line? Yeah, probably. But there are certainly more effective ones out there. The single blades, very good. Effective in all the scenarios. Nice big open mouths, so it's easy to get the material in. They tend to have smaller noses, so you can get between yourself and material. And particularly the serrations on this one were effective against cutting the material because they had larger scallops on them, rather than being those tight, densely packed serrations of the trigger knives. The scalloping on here made them actually quite effective for cutters. However, they do require maintenance. You do have to keep them clean because when they're rusty, they're not going to work. Awful, terrifyingly awful. For years and years, crew jumpers were using these knives as the standard knife that they wanted. And I can ask the crew guys in the room now, anyone still using these?
Nope.
Nope, unanimously, no. We're no longer using these because simply the idea of trying to get that between you and a parachute, terrifying. The idea of being able to cut through large swathes of parachute with it, perhaps. But what actually works quite effectively is if you just take a pinch of the parachute that you're wrapped around, pull it towards you, you'll get creases down it. You can take your hook knife and slice down those creases. And that works very, very well, rather than trying to slash through a loose fabric with a knife that's just going to slide over it. Collector's edition, if anyone. So, conclusions. I've been talking too much now. Conclusions on design efficacy. Avoid small, sharp serrations. They are less than helpful. Weak handles, again, less than helpful. At the end of the first talk I did on this, I offered people the opportunity to try my tests again. I had fabric, I had the knives, and on the first test cut with this polycarbonate knife, that happened. First cut, didn't even make it through one layer of the Type 8 material. Just snapped off. So weak blades, weak handles, not great. The oblique angles between the blade and the frame causes those edges to roll. Now I know this is an axe, but it's easier to see the rolled edge. You see the glinting here? If you can see an edge, you don't have one, is the general rule among knife enthusiasts. When it's rolled over, you're trying to cut now with a blunt piece of metal. It's just not going to work. So when the material slides into these knives and hits the back, rolls that edge, this is what you've got effectively. Glinting and no edge. And the straight blades just weren't effective. They slipped off the front of the material. They weren't able to grip it. They did very little cutting. Good features. Twin blades. Absolutely brilliant. They cut through the material like butter. If I was to advocate for one style of knife for you guys to go and get, I would advocate for anything with twin blades. They cut really very effectively. Okay? Because they have those two blades, they have a scissor action. As you're drawing them into the material doesn't get stuck against the frame because there's just another blade there. So they're very effective cutters. Rounded serrations, as you can see on this one, these do a good job of the drawing, pushing action that we spoke about, as opposed to the tight serrations that got hung up. And the single piece blades, a very large cutting surface in here. And as it cuts, it pushes more blade onto the bit of material behind it. So very effective knives. As I said, they require a bit of maintenance to keep them clean, rust-free, and sharp. The other good things, and we can't neglect this, is the price. These non-skydiving knives, the kite knives especially, less than £10 each. Oh, I've lost my knife. That's a jump's worth of knife. No, it's not. It's a tenner. That's less than 2 beers nowadays. Okay? Yeah, very cheap. And all you might need is a rigger to put a pop stud on them. And very discreet, carry them everywhere. Not everywhere. You might get done for that. But in skydiving scenarios, very easy to carry with you. The other thing about these single piece of metal blades is they're very, very durable. You're not going to get one of those open up mid-cut, okay? They're very, very strong. So my choices, and as I said, the ones I have on my harness. I've got 2 kite knives because they're small, discreet, easy to stash anywhere. And honestly, I would carry more, but I just haven't got round to it. And as a bigger one, I have the rescue knife. Yeah, I'm aware that just got caught. It doesn't when the harness is on. I'll check it in a minute. Yeah, so they're the ones I carry. Yeah, it's all right, I know one. No, it's fine. It's fine. It got caught on the fabric of the sheath. So the reasons I've chose these are as it says on the board there, and as I've discussed already in terms of design efficacy. I'm not saying you should go out and buy those knives. I'm just saying they're the choices I've made having done these tests. Okay, and I have had people argue against my choices, which is absolutely fine. I'm willing to have that discussion with anyone. I'm just saying, given the tests I've done, these are the ones that I've chosen. Maintenance. Typically, when I get a reserve in to repack, I will pull out the knife on every single repack and have a look at it. And mostly, they're fine. Unless you see that glinting right in the corner up against the frame where they've been using it to cut tags from their reserve dates, generally they're okay. However, I have pulled out knives that are rusty, so they haven't been looked at for a while. Once a month, pull your knife out, make sure it's not rusty. It's probably a good, it's a nothing thing to do. Is that all right? Yeah, no worries, pop it back again, okay? Sharpening knives is a skill. It's not something you can do with the single fixed blades. Trying to get a sharpener in here, that's just not going to happen. These ones are basically disposable. However, with this style of knife, they are sharpenable, but it does take a skill. Wrap a bit of 400 to 1,000 grit sandpaper around a pen. You can line it up just the correct angle with the bevel, give it a few strokes, then a few strokes across the back. You're able to keep it nice and sharp. I can do a workshop on knife sharpening if you like, but they are maintainable. But it does take skill. With other serrations, you can get special rods that are designed for sharpening serrations. You've probably seen them in a kitchen, a honing rod, yeah, for sharpening a bread knife, but downscaled. And make sure your knife doesn't have a damaged frame. If you've got these polycarbonate knives, or especially the Z knife, as I've said, over time, these get brittle. You can see discoloration in the handle at the top here. If you can't, there is discoloration in the top there. That's where it's been exposed to UV light. The UV light will make this more brittle, UV being sunlight, for those who are looking at me strangely. And again, these ones, if they're in somewhere in a harness that flexes, they can just snap. I'm not going to snap this one because I need it for later demonstrations. But as we saw already with the other knife, it's not the strongest plastic in the world. Yes, it's polycarbonate. Polycarbonate still shatters. So we're checking the knife, make sure it's nice and sharp, that we don't have that glinting, that we've got nice sharp edges, they're free from rust, and that the handle is one good piece. After maintenance period, 6 months, as I said, with a repack. Pulling it out once a month isn't an issue. Or after you've had it in storage for a while. So if you left your rig at the drop zone maybe for a month or so, the packing sheds typically tend to be cold and wet. You might find that your knife is rusty as well as your kit going mouldy. So don't leave your rig at drop zones. It's not good for it. Okay. So using a knife. Who in this room can touch their toes with straight legs? Yeah, right? Yeah, me too. Can you do it in kit? Have you ever tried? Yeah? Me too. Easy. Palms down. Easy. No worries. Of course we can do that. Imagine a scenario. You've ended up trailing under the jump plane with a static line wrapped around your foot. Completely hypothetical. This has never happened to anyone. It, of course, has. I'm being facetious. It wouldn't happen to any of you, though, of course. We're all far too well trained nowadays for that. How many of you think you could reach up and cut that static line? lift the weight of you. Yeah. Exactly. You have to try and use your core, your legs. Flex. Absolutely. So, as a fit, mobile guy that can climb at 6C, I thought that's doable. I'm quite happy doing overhangs, bat hangs for climbing. Yeah, why not? I can do that. So here I am, got my knife out, reach up. And whilst I can reach my foot, get past my heel even, I can't get under the line because of the tension that it's pulling onto my shoe with. I would need a knife that can reach past my shoe to get to that line.
Easier to use shoelace, surely, just take your shoe off.
You could cut your shoelace, take your shoe off. Good point. I didn't want to. Yep. It was uncomfortable. And also,
Have you seen the film?
very humbling. So he's asking about 127 hours where the chap cut his own arm off with a pocket knife. And they then went back for filming and he showed them the setup that he had to try and lift the boulder. And this time when he set it up, it worked. And the boulder lifted and his bones dropped out the bottom. Galling, right? Yes, but that was very humbling for me. I was like, no worries, I'd be able to cut that. I could not. So, one more thing. Using your knife one-handed. Why one-handed?
The other arm might be broken or trapped,
Broken or trapped, absolutely.
or the other knife on the other side might be covered by something so you can't get to it.
Can't get to the knife on one side, you can only get to it with one particular hand. It's entangled or what have you. As we heard earlier about the chap whose knife was pinned in by his leg, if that was your arm, you've only got one arm. So you get your knife out. How's your knife mounted? If it's mounted with a tag outside and the knife in a pocket, I can take the tag out, but then I still need to manipulate the knife around into my hand. Again, easy while I'm standing here, nice and calm, no wind, but trying to do that in the air with the wind blowing it can be a bit of a faff. Here we go. So, pulling out on its tab, having to make it usable. Or one hand, draw out, cut. Cheeky grin. So, final thoughts on this. 2 knives are better than 1. On your kit, being able to reach a knife with your hand that you don't have to reach across your body for, because you might not be able to, is a good idea. If you've got your arms pinned up, you want a knife up high that you can get to. If you've got your arms pinned down, you want a knife down low you can get to. So 1 up, 1 down, it's probably a sensible option. And as I've said, with the little kite knives, you can keep them anywhere. Even the polycarbonate ones, they stash very easily into various bits of harness. Twin blades cut the best, but they can be hard to fit the bulky items into. And the single piece bodies, very strong, good cutters. Not quite as good as the twin blades, but still very effective. Easy to maintain. Serrations that are known to cut fibrous materials well, but only on large scallop serrations for skydiving use. Narrow serrations that hang up, probably very good for a monofilament fiber like you have in fishing, but for the tight weaves that we use, not effective at all. In fact, prevent the cutting. There we go. Any questions about any of that? Some of you look a bit startled, the rest of you look bored. Got a question at the back there. Steve, would you mind? Thank you.
Hi. Nice
Hello.
talk, Simon. With those double-edged knives, did you find that at certain angles the blades would twist and have the material go in the gap in between the flat faces of the knives, or was that not a problem on any of them?
On all of the tests, the twin blades knives effectively cut. I did find that there was material hung up in the blades on the weaker frame, as I said earlier. The weaker frame where it opens, there's still material stuck in this one. I left it in there just to show people. So on the blades, on the knives that they twist out open like this, they cut less effectively because of that bulk in there. However, still cut. cut every single time. Yeah. So if you are going to get a twin blade one, get one with a nice strong frame. Got another question down here.
How do you prioritize the ability to cut between the twin blade and the single fixed blade versus the kind of how wide the mouth is?
So my thought on that would be if I needed to cut webbing. If I needed to cut a single line, something that's not very bulky, I would go for the twin blade knife if it was the one that was accessible. Obviously go for the most accessible one. If you can't get to it, it's no good. But I would use the twin blade to be cutting webbing, single lines, things like that, because you're not having to get that bulk into the mouth. With something more bulky, say you're in a canopy wrap, I'd go for the one with a larger mouth, typically the solid frame piece, because it's able to cut material on the way in, and then once it's inside the mouth of the blade.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
Just a question, and I'm not sure, and
That's
you
okay.
might be able to help me out. On aircrafts, jump aircrafts, is it mandatory to have a knife on board as well?
So a knife is mandatory if we're dispatching static line students. That's part of the aircraft equipment to make it a parachuting aircraft. I would need to check the regulations to see if it was mandatory for AFF and tandem only operations. But typically, they will put one in the aircraft because it's so easy to just have a knife in the aircraft. There's somewhere safe to stash it. But yes, certainly if a drop zone is dropping static line category system, then they will have a knife in the aircraft.
And with that choice, would you recommend a different type of knife for this operation, or would the choice that a straight bladed knife would do?
Again, I think the reason that we have straight-bladed knives in the aircraft has a legacy to it. They've gone from an aircrew knife, because this is what was the standard for the RAF and the military. They would have an aircrew knife for those purposes. So that's what we adopted. People aren't going to spend £200 on a knife nowadays to stick in the back of the aircraft. They'd much rather go for something like the Mora knife, which is one that I had way back in the beginning. There we go. This knife here, bushcraft knife. Pick them up for £10, £15. Way better than £200. But the reason they've chosen, I think, a straight blade like that is just legacy. I must be honest. If I was dispatching a static line student, they had a hang up and I was going to cut and release them, I'm probably not going to reach back into the aircraft and pull out I'm going to take one off my harness and use that. That's my thought on it. But that's not to say it's what you should do. It's just how I would deal with the situation personally. Yeah, I think it's just heritage. It's just legacy. But yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Anyone else?
Not so much a question, a couple of points.
Yep.
You mentioned replacing the blades on the two-bladed knife. Mm-hmm. And I've seen some people who've done that, and a few months later they come to look at the knife again and the screws have dropped out where they haven't put them back in tight enough, and just use and movement has allowed the screws to fall out. So the blades will fall out when you come to use it.
Yes.
And the second is a pet peeve with low-experienced skydivers who wear a hook knife on their chest strap and let it fall to the side so it completely covers their reserve handle and they can't see it. So it's good to have knives accessible to either hand, but if you're going to have them somewhere in the middle on your chest strap, they need to be fixed in a place where they can't cover either of your handles.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you for your input. Anyone else? Any other questions, input, comments? Nope. When you get to play with the chopper. Yeah, so this is a completely different subject. But if there's no more questions or anything, thank you very much. If you'd like to come and see the knives, you're more than welcome.